the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Welcome. Welcome in. I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks to everyone who attended our live video Q&A on Thursday night. We had fun. I totally forgot to ask trivia questions, which I won't do on Sunday. A lot of you wound up jumping into a DraftKings contest with me, which should be really fun. And then, of course, we had a game to watch. The Chiefs yakking away a contest they should have won. Jamal Charles submitting a fine fantasy night, but a disastrous real-life one as he fumbles away the game. The big panic, fantasy-wise, is coming from C.J. Anderson owners, and I'll talk about him in just a moment. Who'd have thought we wouldn't be discussing how completely finished Peyton Manning is? Oh wait, I guess I'd have thought that. But yeah, the Broncos are definitely not out of the woods entirely despite scoring 31 points last night. But anyway, I'll get to all of that. For now, let's get to
today's kickoff.
On today's show, I will discuss how you might possibly solve a problem like C.J. Anderson and review the rest of what I saw on Thursday night's tape. Then I'll talk about some more of the panic-inducing injury guys for Week 2, on whom there's a little more news, or what passes for news. We'll have a song to send you into the weekend in a good mood, and then, even though it's Friday, and even though you all expected Cousin Josh to come on the show and take his medicine for saying Carlos Hyde would likely be out of the league by the end of the season, unfortunately, Cousin Josh was in Texas all week and is traveling, so he won't be on. Personally, I think he's hoping Carlos Hyde has a terrible Week 2 so he can come on and avoid the heat altogether next Friday. But anyway, we've got a great guest who's agreed to fill in. Really excited to have Dave Richard from CBS. He's going to come aboard, and we're going to talk about Week 2 rankings. We're brought to you today by BetDSI.com, the online sportsbook where I play. They're one of the original online books. They've been around for 16 years. They're known for helping set the lines. They're accessible. The website's always up. They always pay when you want your winnings, and they get an A+ on many sportsbook reviews. In Week 2, I'm parlaying Titans, Buccaneers, I know, but I'm getting 10 points, and the over on Niners Steelers. Now, I play for low stakes, gang. I do it because it's fun and because BetDSI makes it safe and easy. Go to BetDSI.com right now and use offer code Harris10, and within a couple of hours, they'll put $10 in your account to play with. That's BetDSI.com, offer code Harris, no space, the number 10. Someone also suggested that I mention that if you have an addiction problem, go to GamblersAnonymous.com. It's a good idea. Please don't bet huge amounts on anything you can't afford. We talk about all these things because we personally have a lot of fun doing them, and we do them in moderation, stuff like DraftKings too. But if you have a hard time with moderation, I get it. GamblersAnonymous.com might be able to help. Let's talk more about C.J. Anderson, because he's now nominated as the most tweeted question for the early season. After 2 games, CJA is stuck on, let's get this right, 29 touches for 77 scrimmage yards and no touchdowns. It makes you hunger for the days of Monte Ball. We have this sense that Ball was such a disaster at the beginning of last year. Guess what? In his first 2 games against the Colts and Chiefs last year, Ball had 172 scrimmage yards on 40 touches. I bring up Monte Ball really apropos of nothing, though. The Broncos still had a great offense for most of last year, and Ball probably did underperform a little bit, considering what Anderson and Ronnie Hillman were able to do after Ball got hurt. This is a new universe. In my view, the root of all Denver's offensive problems is that offensive line. For the second straight game, you saw a defense basically pin their ears back and plug at the line and let Denver's receivers try and win one-on-one on the outside for the second straight game, a combination of no time to throw and maybe Peyton Manning's diminishing skills. I say maybe because he did have some nice zinging attempts last year too, but all that combined to lead to not much in the way of big plays. But let's get back to the run game. So far, I don't see anything that indicates Anderson is bad or diminished by his toe injury or any of that. There's no room to run. And the proof of that is that Ronnie Hillman isn't doing much of anything either. He's had a few more consistent stretches of finding space, but Anderson is the one who had the better long runs last night, including the first play of the game. Let's not bury our heads in the sand here. I'm not going to say there's nothing to worry about. If we could go back to our drafts, knowing what we know, would Anderson be as high a draft pick? Obviously not. And you'll recall, I never actually had him as a first rounder. He was a second rounder for me all the way, but I'm not going to break my arm patting myself on the back because even that, no, of course, I wouldn't rate him as a second rounder, knowing that the Broncos would look like this on offense. But we can't go back. So the larger question is, what do we do now? And the answer is, you're not going to like hearing it, but you probably have to ride it out. I'm constitutionally opposed to trading away players for pennies on the dollar. I've been asked on Twitter, would I trade him for, Bishop Sankey, Danny Woodhead? And of course not. You aren't going to gain anything by getting a marginal fantasy player for C.J. Anderson. Now, I've also been asked, would I trade him for Lamar Miller or Latavius Murray? And yeah, those guys at least should be fantasy starters, although as a Latavius Murray owner, I can say he didn't exactly light the world ablaze in Week 1. But my guess is that the Miller or Murray owner in your league would probably say, yeah, I'm not sure I want C.J. Anderson in that version of the Broncos offense. And then you've got the people saying on Twitter, dude, should I drop him? And it's just not the way I roll. I think, this probably does have platoon written on it. I think Hillman will be as or more involved. I think we might be in for some more frustration against the Lions in Week 3. But I think in most situations, you have to try and ride it out. Of course, I said the same thing last year about Ball. Although that was also probably pretty good advice. Maybe it would have turned out to be good advice, but then Ball tore up his groin, and we never got to find out. We're also sponsored today by DraftKings, and you've heard me talk about it a lot. It's fantasy football on demand. And let's say you did draft C.J. Anderson for your commissioner-style team, and you're really frustrated, but you're taking my advice and letting it play out. Well, maybe you can take out some of your frustrations at DraftKings, because every week you get to assemble a new team. DraftKings gives you a salary cap, and you pick 9 players, looking for good value based on that week's matchups, and you don't have to take C.J. Anderson if you don't want to. In fact, you don't even have to play every week if you don't want to. It's totally on demand. You can play the big stakes games at DraftKings, and they make someone a millionaire every single week. And you can also play the lower stakes games, like I do, where you're shooting to finish in the top half of a contest and double your money. It's a lot of fun, and if you go to DraftKings.com right now and use offer code Harris, you'll get a free entry to try it out. So get out of your C.J. Anderson worries right now. Go to DraftKings.com and use offer code Harris. What other thoughts can we take away from Broncos Chiefs moving forward? I guess Peyton's demise was greatly exaggerated. Well, exaggerated by a lot of folks, but not me, since I told you I didn't think this was a case of greatly diminished skills. The one alarm bell I hear when I watch Peyton throw is the deep ball, and it's not really anything to do with arm strength per se, at least not directly. He's actually overthrown some deep balls these first 2 games, and that could indicate that some of his touch is lacking as he really puts his back into the long ones and wings it hard straight up in the air. Maybe some of the touch is lost, but really small sample size. And as I said earlier, there were throws Thursday where Peyton had all the mustard you could need, but it's not all wine and roses for sure. He throws wobblers. He really always has. That one pass early on to Virgil Green on the sidelines took a million years to get there. To say that Peyton Manning is at the height of his powers would be stupid. But I think he proved Thursday that if he can get the ball out of the shotgun, operate quickly, and get any sort of protection, he can be effective as your fantasy starter, but it really is going to come down to that line because it's not playing well. Demaryius Thomas had a big statistical game and came up big on some late catches when Manning really needed him, but I have to say, did you notice that it sure seemed to me on second watch that Thomas was coming out of that game a lot. It felt like every time he took a big hit, he had to come out and then come back in. I wonder if there's something wrong there other than the hand he injured in week 1. But, you can't presuppose anything, and he was able to continue to play. I'm not saying you dump him or anything like that. He and Emmanuel Sanders feel like very nice options still going forward, even with that line a question mark. The Chiefs. Well, it feels like I've basically ignored the Chiefs. I mentioned Charles. He's all good as far as fantasy goes. Travis Kelce, unfortunately, crashed back down to earth because he's a tight end, not named Gronk or Graham. Fortunately, he did manage a short catch, and that turned into a big run, right, late in the fourth quarter that rescued him from an utter disaster. But it's an object lesson in the perils of relying too much on every week production from a tight end. Kelce didn't get worse. The Chiefs just used him less, and that's probably going to happen soon with Tyler Eifert and any other tight end you care to mention other than those top 2 guys, which isn't to say you don't start them. It's not to say you're benching Kelce because it's fine. You roll with Kelce. Just don't get carried away with them as flexes. Jeremy Maclin produced about the same stat line as Kelce, which, is okay, but not great. A little frustrating, but it is nice to see the Chiefs also hand it off to Maclin a couple of times, even though it didn't work out wonderfully in week 2. At least they recognize that they have something this year that they haven't had in previous years, which is a perimeter player who's, going to help them when he has the ball in his hands. I will probably continue to put Maclin around the 20 to 25 spot most weeks.
Injury news.
LaShawn McCoy wasn't on the Bills' injury report Wednesday and then was on it Thursday with his hamstring issue, which has some folks buzzing because that isn't always the best sign. Of course, we're not going to get a straight answer about Shady's availability until the inactives come out Sunday, so we're left in the position that we're so often left in these days, which is how much risk do you personally want to tolerate? If you're risk averse and have other options on your roster, no arguments. It's cool. You can definitely sit Shady if it makes you more comfortable. If risk isn't so distasteful to you, or maybe phrasing it another way, if you can deal with the downside of re-injury when there's the upside of McCoy, maybe taking a bad Patriots run defense behind the woodshed, then, you probably start him if he's active Sunday. If McCoy winds up inactive, probably no single guy takes his place, but Carlos Williams is the one who'd interest me most, even though Anthony Dixon would almost certainly be involved. And who knows, maybe Rex Ryan wouldn't be ready to roll with the rookie in pass protection situations, so maybe Dixon would actually get the workload. They're not going to tell us that. T.Y. Hilton is really shaping up as a total unknown for Monday Night Football. He's dealing with a really bad bruise on his knee, and it's going to be a situation where you're not going to know what you need to know to make an educated decision come Sunday morning. Heck, there's a real possibility that this is the kind of injury that even if Hilton suits up, he could be in decoy mode because, with a bruise, you don't think he's going to hurt himself worse. It's going to be a matter of pain tolerance. So he could be in decoy mode. It stinks, and it's not going to stop stinking until this week is over. Personally, if I were a Hilton owner, I think I'd be looking for other options. And if he winds up active and has a big game against the Jets, I tip my cap and say, cool, nice. I'll be happy to use him week 3. And it muddies the waters on how much we should bump Andre Johnson and Dante Moncrief and Philip Dorsett too. If you want to go into Monday with Hilton as an option, but then back him up with someone like Moncrief, I get it. For me, it feels like a situation I probably want to avoid if I can. Arian Foster doing work in practice. And the Texans, as they should, are double talking like crazy. Is it possible he actually returns for week 2 against the Panthers? Of course it is. Houston isn't going to advertise to Carolina. But if I've been waiting on Foster, I'm totally cool sitting out this week, no matter what happens. If he's a surprise active on Sunday, would it be in a full-time role? Don't know. Kind of want to see it first, especially since, if I drafted him a little bit later, it means I probably have other running backs available as an option. But it's trending in the right direction for Foster. Maybe we will see him week 3. Surprise, surprise, Jordan Reed is battling an injury. At least this time it is not a hamstring or a concussion. It's a quad injury. Washington is claiming is nothing serious. And Reed should be able to play Sunday against the Rams. Julio Jones has sat out practice both Wednesday and Thursday, reportedly because of a hamstring thing. But the Falcons are not betraying any anxiety about him missing week 2. Again, I'm going to keep an eye on Friday's practice, see if he's able to go. I'll tweet if I start to have any real concerns about Julio playing against the Giants. But, yeah, no incentive to be honest. So you got to be ready for anything in today's NFL. If this is a case where he's active, and for now I'm assuming that he will be, Julio's going to be in my lineup at any strength. Chris Ivory has a groin issue, but he's supposedly locked and loaded. And even though it's Monday night, I think you go ahead and wait for him. Josh McCown sounds like he'll be able to play instead of Johnny Manziel against the Titans, but of course you don't want too many shares of that Browns offense. CJ Spiller, I talked about yesterday a little bit. The Saints aren't being straightforward on his availability. Surprise, surprise. But I've assumed in my ranks that he will return from his knee scope. If he's active on Sunday, in other words, if he's not inactive, I think you probably use Spiller as you normally would. He's a point per reception option. You don't want to go too crazy until you actually see him in a regular season game in that offense. Delaney Walker didn't practice Thursday either. Didn't practice Wednesday or Thursday. Shaping up as a game-time decision, but Delaney Walker's a tough dude, and he's been an effective player even after being questionable with injuries in the past. So for me, if Walker winds up active Sunday, I think I just use him as I normally would. Trey Mason seems ready to rock. Seems like Todd Gurley will sit out. Again, we don't know for sure. Andre Ellington, he probably is not ready to rock. He's going to listen to some smooth jazz while he most likely misses week 2.
Harris's Music Digression.
No smooth jazz here, as today's digression comes from Hani El Khatib, whose 3rd full-length record is out now. It's called Moonlight. It's really good. El Khatib is actually somebody, I'll admit, I hadn't heard of until Kyle Starkle, who's turned into kind of an unofficial music director of the little podcast that could, turned me on to him, and I've been listening to him the past month or so in the car. Really like the record, having a blast listening to him. So thank you very much to Hani for letting us use a song of his, and I hope you'll check out his music. This one is called Melt Me.
Today's guest.
And today's guest, it's a big treat. It's not Cousin Josh. Let's face it, it's better than Cousin Josh, our normal Friday guest. It's Dave Richard of CBS, a very well-respected gentleman in the fantasy community. Dave, thanks for doing this. How are you?
Is this really happening? This is really happening. We are here. Chris, how are you?
It's awesome. I mean, so many years I was at ESPN, so there was just no chance for us to do stuff together. But now that I'm on my own, yeah, man.
This is great. And I'll tell you what, when it comes to being well-respected, you're up there with the rest of them, Chris. So I'm so happy that you asked me to come on. I'm rooting for your podcast. I want to see you do well. I hope someday that our podcast and your podcast are 1-2 in the rankings on Apple iTunes.
And we won't even talk about who's 1 and who's 2. By then, we won't.
Right, exactly. It'll be a dead heat tie.
Exactly. All right. So rather than have us talk about how great we are for the entire segment, I thought we would talk
how bad we are.
Or how bad we are. Right. Let's talk about ranks, because I don't get this opportunity to talk to you on the air very much about players that we might differ on. Let's just be clear, like for week 2 ranks, when we look at our respective ranks, we were having a hard time finding a lot of guys that we disagree on, because we both, do a lot of studying, and I think we have a pretty good sense of what's going on in the NFL. So I respect your opinion, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about some of these guys. The first guy that I was thinking we could talk about is Alfred Morris. You have him as your number 30 running back. He's more like an RB2 for me. He's my number 16. But it is a tough matchup against the Rams, and I have a feeling you're going to tell me that's the number 1 concern you have.
Yeah, it's definitely the number 1 concern. The number 2 concern that I have is how often does he get 25 carries, which is what he had last week. Washington did an incredible job of ball control. The first half, they dominated the playing time. I think St. Louis tries to do the exact same thing. And so I don't think that the Redskins will run as many plays as they did last week. And even if they did, I know that they'd want to run Alf, but I think this is a dangerous matchup for the second week in a row. Just like you said, it might even be worse because Miami came out flat, and Alf was picking up chunks of yardage that no one expected him to get. I've been on this Alf bandwagon since he was a rookie.
Yeah.
I was surprised to see just how well he was doing. And I don't think he can do that against St. Louis a second week in a row with 25 carries. No. I think it's probably closer to 20. I know he's not going to catch the ball, and I know that if Washington is down in this game, that Alf isn't going to be involved nearly as much in the offense. And I don't think he's going to have a good chance at scoring. I think he's going to do worse than last week. I think he's a flex option at best. I wouldn't want to start him as a number 2 running back.
So I totally see what you're saying. I mean, game flow dependent, he literally is like, you look that up in the dictionary, there's a picture of Alfred Morris, because and he lucked into a game flow that was into his favor last week, because like you said, the Dolphins came out flat. I'm sticking with him as my 16, but I acknowledge the risk for sure. A player that we've talked about on the podcast
I can't let you off the hook.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I can't let you off the hook that easily. I want to hear some of the names of other running backs that you've got behind Alf, like who you have ranked 20 to 24, and how they kind of stack up.
My ranks of players right below Alfred Morris, I have Frank Gore,
okay,
Doug Martin, Tevin Coleman, Rashad Jennings, Amir Abdullah, who I know you like a lot, and we talk about on the show so much.
Wow. So you're looking at Alfred Morris definitely getting over 100 rushing yards or 40 yards and a touchdown.
Sure. I think a touchdown is always in play. That's super game flow dependent, obviously. But yeah, I think the workload is there, and I think it was an impressive outing for a Washington offensive front against what was supposed to be an absolutely top-of-the-line elite Dolphins defensive front. So that's where I'm coming down on him.
Okay. All right. I will
respectfully disagree.
Yes. Tevin Coleman for sure I think is going to have a better game. Rashad Jennings, I would take him over Alfred Morris for sure. Where you might get me is on Frank Gore, because I just don't know how much work he's going to get, and he doesn't have an easy matchup either.
Right.
But I almost feel like it doesn't matter with Gore when it comes to touchdowns, because I love, one of my favorite things to do is watching the Colts in the red zone. And I think Andrew Luck is a master already in the red zone, and the running back is always in play there as either on a handoff or catching a pass, as Ahmad Bradshaw was last year. So that, to me, that kind of gives Gore an edge over Alf. I think he's got a little bit of a better chance to score. That's all I'm saying.
I hear you. So now let's move on to the oft-discussed Danny Woodhead. Your number 21 running back, my number 34, and those are our standard ranks. And then in case people think like, well, they're going to wildly vary their rankings in point per reception, he's your 19th running back and my 32nd. So we're pretty consistent. Mm-hmm. I'm not even going to give my Woodhead speech again because I've now done it like 2 days in a row. People are getting sick of it. But Brandon Funston was on a couple of days ago, and we kind of were in lockstep on Woodhead. So it's good to have you on to give the other side of the conversation.
Yeah, and from what I see is the Chargers are more comfortable with him on the field. And I kind of saw it coming in the preseason because you saw Melvin Gordon. He looked like he didn't even belong out there. Had a couple of nice runs in his last preseason game. Definitely looked best in week one. He had some really nice runs and really ran hard in week one. And I think in time he's going to end up being the lead back in San Diego. But for now, it's Danny. And I'm stunned at the 2 touchdowns he had last week. I don't think he's going to get 2 this week. I'm not sure he's going to get 1 this week because this is a tough matchup. Mm-hmm. But the playing time that he will get, regardless of game flow, is significant. And I feel better starting somebody who I know is going to get 15 touches, regardless of game flow, than others who need, like Alfred Morris. He needs the game flow to go his way. He needs to have first and goal at the 1 for things to go his way. I think Woodhead's a different story. I think no matter how the flow of the game goes for San Diego, and the matchup is tough, but I still think Danny can make a difference, especially as a pass catcher out of the backfield, where I think the Chargers are going to have to lean on him more in that regard this week than last week.
It's a compelling case, and I have to say my Twitter following agrees with you because when my ranks came out, that was a voice of unanimity and displeasure in my Danny Woodhead ranking.
He's fun to start too. Like you like rooting for the underdog.
Right, you can fit him in your pocket. It's fun.
Yeah,
to root for
exactly.
guys.
Yeah, you can take him with you grocery shopping. He'll probably even tell you how much over your budget you are by the time you get to the frozen food section.
He can run. That little calculator they put on the shopping cart.
Exactly.
Like he can run that, but with his feet, right? Because he's stand on the calculator.
He probably, when he's at home, he probably just runs around his house with a red ball cap and an oversized red T-shirt with the letter A on it, like Alvin from Alvin and the Chipmunks. That's how little Danny Woodhead is. Yet he is an awesome football player.
Yeah, he's
a lot of fun to watch, and he's stronger this year than he was last year.
Very good. Let's move on to a couple of receivers. I don't think we disagree on Mike Evans. You have him 13, I have him 21. For me, that's close enough where we both are saying, yeah, I think probably if you drafted him and he's active, you probably start him in this game. But, I have a lot of folks on my feed, I'm sure you have a ton of folks on your feed who are saying, how can I ever trust a guy who was supposed to play in week 1, who, could play, have to be playing, potentially limited or as a decoy in week 2. How can you guys rate him as a starter? Shouldn't I give him a week off? How do you respond to that question?
I don't like giving star players with high potential weeks off because if you did it with Peyton Manning in week 2, look what happened.
Yeah.
And listen, I don't know how you felt about Peyton this week, Chris, but I was nervous to start him. I had him out of my top 12. I didn't want to use him because I thought there was a chance of another bad game. And then I figured he'd be able to reshuffle the deck on the offensive line and get things moving in the right direction. Well, he did that in the second quarter of the game against the Chiefs. And now anybody who didn't start him feels bad about it, but they will readily admit that they knew that Peyton Manning had that kind of potential, and they left him on the bench. There's time to do that later on this season. I don't think now's the time to do it. I think Mike Evans was pretty close to playing in week 1. And Lovie Smith just erred on the side of caution, and then he watched his team get obliterated. And I think that Tampa Bay is already kind of in some sort of a desperation mode, and they want to get Jameis comfortable. They've got to put Mike on the field. It'll really change how defenses play against them. And I think that Mike is going to be a good play. It's a little bit game flow dependent, but most of the game flows that you could see happening in this game, a Saints blowout win or a high-scoring close game, both of those favor Mike getting a lot of targets and a lot of catches. And even though the cornerbacks for New Orleans are big guys, I think Mike is faster, and that'll help him out a lot. So I'm starting him. I think he's a good play this week.
I think I agree. I see maybe a tiny bit more risk than you do, but he's inside. I think for where I have him ranked if you drafted him as high as you took him, you don't have better receivers in my ranks. So I'm with you. It's a personal philosophy thing, and it's something I've talked about a couple of times here this week. Yeah, are there some fantasy owners out there who just have the temperament that says, I just don't want a piece of that risk. I am willing to sacrifice the upside just so that I don't get a bagel. Like, I get it. It isn't the philosophy that I share. I'm with you, a player who's got this type of touchdown upside week to week. I mean, he could give you 3 touchdowns this week and no one would be shocked. For me, I think I'm using him. But, I can't castigate the people who feel that way. It's a valid way to feel. It's just not how I approach it, or it sounds like how you approach it.
I'd be shocked if he scored 3 touchdowns because that means that Jameis Winston
has to throw.
Yeah. Unless he's running one in on an end around. Maybe he does. Who knows? Probably not. That's not Dirk Cutter style.
I think probably what's going to happen is a bunch of accidental forward laterals to Mike Evans that Jameis does accidentally, and he scores 3.
Offensive fumble recovery for a touchdown.
Oh,
how about that?
It. I think we should establish that as an over-under 2.5 for fumbles recovered in the end zone for Mike Evans this week. I'm taking the over.
There you go.
Let's talk about Sammy Watkins, a player I was pretty high on. He was inside my top 20 wide receivers this summer, despite all my concerns over quarterback. It's funny because it feels like for 1 week the Bills solved their quarterback problem to some degree. I mean, Tyrod Taylor didn't have to do all that much, but threw a beautiful deep ball to Percy Harvin and didn't make any mistakes. He played well. I admit I was too high on him this summer. I have Sammy Watkins even just in week 2, number 25 in my receiver ranks. You have him 38, and I think we both understand what the concerns are, but tell me about your methodology of how you get Watkins basically out of a lot of fantasy lineups this week.
And let's first throw out last year, because last year he was terrible. His quarterback situation was bad, and when he played New England, Darrelle Revis was on the field. So I don't think it applies this year. But Bill Belichick still knows just how dangerous Sammy can be, and I think he recognizes how dangerous the deep ball can be after what Percy Harvin did last week. And I almost feel like that the Patriots are going to have their hands full defending that deep pass, and they're going to take chances defending that deep pass because they know that Buffalo is just a running team. I feel like that what we're seeing with Buffalo is just the same thing that we saw in San Francisco. And because even though they've got all these great weapons and guys that can run fast 40s and get downfield and catch passes deeper than 30 yards, it still makes them rather predictable. And if the game gets one-sided and New England does their thing and they find ways to score through the air, because I don't think they're getting it done on the ground, then it's going to be even easier for them to go after Tyrod Taylor and make things hard on him throwing the football. So I'm very nervous to use Sammy Watkins this week. He's going to have better matchups. I feel like when I drafted Sammy, and I got him in a couple of leagues, he was a bargain for me. He was no better than my third receiver, and I really felt like I could wait to see it happen. And especially now after week 1 and seeing just how little he did, now I know to kind of take a hands-off approach. And even though he's got the same type of potential that a Mike Evans might have, I'm willing to put him on the bench this week and to take that risk and basically kind of dare Sammy Watkins to make me regret benching him. Almost to the point where I probably would end up coming back to him in week 3 and then he would be terrible. So I'm banking on Belichick coming up with a way to solve the Sammy problem. I'm banking on Buffalo running the football a lot. I don't think it's going to be a particularly high-scoring game, especially for the Bills. So Sammy's somebody that I don't really want to trust.
So I've got Sammy 25, like I said. He's right behind Larry Fitzgerald, right ahead of Andre Johnson, Steve Smith, Terrence Williams. So I'm putting him in the neighborhood of a high level of flex starter.
Yep.
And there's a lot to be learned from what you said. I mean, something that I think I didn't consider, like what if Bill Belichick does? Because what Belichick is always going to do is try to scheme to take that one thing you do best away from you. If he judges that it's Sammy Watkins, Sammy could be in some serious trouble. Do
you think he would do that though, Chris, or do you think he'd be more focused on the run? Like, this is one of the struggles I had with breaking down this game this week is in the past he's tried to take Charles Clay away from the Dolphins, and now here he is on Buffalo. Is he going to focus on Clay? Is he going to focus on Sammy? Is he going to focus on Shady if he plays? I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in Buffalo, whether you want to admit it or not, whether it looks pretty or not. And I think Bill might have to really spread the defense around quite a bit. It's going to take Greg Olsen getting real creative for the Bills offense to put up more than 24 points.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing. If you don't scheme to take Sammy Watkins away, seeing Antonio Brown make plays last week against our Super Bowl hero corner, right? I think Sammy Watkins has a nice little game. And, he's a talented enough player with elite ball skills to the point where I feel like all you need is one. And if they decide they're going to not give safety help on Watkins, I think you're going to see a long touchdown. And that's, my assumption is that there's a lot more focus in that Patriot defense on how bad they looked against the run in Week 1 and shoring that up and not having Dominic Easley for this game and not having Vince Wilfork anymore. And I think they're trying, there were some big holes for D'Angelo Williams to run through. So if I were making a bet about how the Patriots are going to attack this, it's going to be with a little bit more single coverage on Watkins, which is how I wound up with the rank I wound up. When Butler started the game against the Steelers, kind of playing sides, but eventually, he was on Antonio Brown, and he did a really nice job staying with Brown, which is very hard to do. But the ball skills for the guy who made the play in the Super Bowl, the ball skills were horrible for Malcolm Butler in Week 1. It may be Butler against Watkins. I would take Watkins in that matchup, though.
I could see Watkins doing a little bit better than I'm giving him credit for. Part of me just doesn't want to take the chance against New England.
I hear you. So let's wrap this up. We talked about Alf already, and apparently I'm obsessed with all Washington players this week. So I wanted to just hit on Pierre Garçon and maybe a little Jordan Reed, although I think I understand why I'm higher on Jordan Reed than you. It's like now he's got a quad injury. It's like maybe
I've never been a Reed guy.
Yeah. Well,
and when I was a Garçon guy, he burned me. So maybe it's some personal bias here. Maybe I'm a bad guy to ask about these guys.
Well, Reed, we don't even really need to discuss. He's already complaining about a quad injury. Like, we don't really even need to talk about. But actually, I'm interested in talking about Garçon because I think for Deshaun Jackson owners, they look at Pierre Garçon as a potential solution. And of course, to rely on any Washington receiving weapon this week is to rely on the Rams not destroying Kirk Cousins every 5 seconds. How do you come to, you didn't rank Garçon among your top 48 wide receivers. For me, he's number 23. It can't just be personal bias. I'm sure you're worried about the matchup too.
It's the matchup more from Kirk Cousins' perspective than it is Garçon's perspective, and it's just a lack of confidence in him in a standard scoring league. PPR is a different story. Mm-hmm. He had 8 targets last week, 6 catches are nice, 74 yards. If you're telling me he's going to do that against St. Louis, I'm not going to bat an eyelash. I'm going to say 6 for 74. Yeah, that's what Garçon can do, especially as a number 1 guy. I have a hard time believing that he can get a big play for a touchdown. I don't know if the protection is there enough for Cousins to really count on that happening. I think it's a risk that is unnecessary with Garçon, with a ceiling that if 6 for 74 is the ceiling, I'd rather go in a different direction with guys who I know have higher ceilings, like a Brandon Coleman, maybe even a Tyler Lockett, because I expect Seattle to throw a lot. Maybe even Jermaine Kearse, because I think he's the same type of player as Garçon, and he's got a better matchup, and his quarterback has a better matchup. So am I foolish for ranking him outside my top 48? You might get me to admit that, Chris. You really might, because Allen Hurns is in my top 48. Let's face it, his matchup is absolutely not any better than what Pierre's got, and Pierre's got a higher ceiling both in standard and PPR. So you might get me to make a change there. But I'm still not excited about starting him. And by putting him as a number 2 wide receiver, especially ahead of, you've got Sammy Watkins behind him. Do I have that understood correctly?
I have Sammy Watkins 25 and Pierre Garçon 23, so let's say they're tied, but yes.
Yeah, I'd rather, even after the discussion we just had about Watkins, I'd still rather start Watkins because, as you said, one great play could change everything, and I think there's a better chance of Sammy having a great play than there is of Garçon having a great play.
I think I get that. I think I would argue that the floor is a lot higher for Garçon than a lot of people that we've talked about, so maybe that's where I'm coming from. But you could probably convince me that the ceiling is significantly lower. Garçon's fast, but I'm with you. It's not so much about Garçon. It's much more about Kirk Cousins and the idea that Kirk Cousins isn't good even when he doesn't have 700 St. Louis Rams bearing down on him, and he certainly will have that this week.
We should make a bet on that. You can have Garcon, and I'll take Watkins. And I don't know what we put up for grabs here. Maybe a tweet. Winner gets to tweet something from the loser's account. How about that?
Man, I want control of a CBS. You don't want me with control of a CBS account. God knows what I would do.
Well, my account, it wouldn't be the CBS account.
Oh, all right. Well, I think it should be somebody who, a little lower in my ranks who's still inside your top 48. I have Watkins and Garcon basically tied, but how about you said Brandon Coleman? You rather so you can have Brandon Coleman, I can have Pierre Garcon?
Let's do it. But in standard, not PPR.
All right, standard it is. Hey, Dave, thanks for doing this. I didn't mention off the top, but I hope folks will follow Dave because he's really he's one of the pillars of the industry. He knows his stuff. Obviously, you heard him talk, and he's so good at this. He's on Twitter at Dave Richard, and you're a fantastic man. You have a daily podcast as well at CBS that people should listen to. I listen to it regularly. It's great. Thank you very much for coming aboard and helping us buffer the loss of cousin Josh for this Friday.
Well, if you're admitting that you listen to my podcast, then I might as well admit that I listen to yours. And Apex Manor was turned on to me by you. So
sweet. Thank
you very much for helping me listen to Under the Gun.
It's a great song. Hey, thanks again, Dave.
Good luck in your leagues this week, Chris. I'll talk to you down the line.
And that's our show. Please remember, an hour before kickoff on Sunday, after the early inactives are out, you can ask me lineup questions in real time, and I'll answer them in streaming video. Just go to harrisfootball.com/videos for instructions. Thanks again to Hani El Khatib for letting us use his great song, and to Dave Richard for doing such a great job filling in for cousin Josh. I'll be back Monday right here with Game Tape Review to give you that fantasy football edge. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will talk to you on Monday.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.